Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are. On behalf of Dassault System and SpaceNews, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Beyond Earth, Blueprint for Small Medium Business Innovation. We've got a really great discussion for you today about the global space economy and the role of startups and small and medium-sized businesses in that economy. I'd love for you all to be a really active part of that conversation. So please feel free to submit questions for our speakers using the Q&A function. And then at the end of the chat today, we'll set aside some time to hopefully get through as many of those questions as we can. First off, though, I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Matt Alderton. I'm a SpaceNews contributor, a longtime space enthusiast myself, and have been covering space and satellites as a journalist for more than a decade now. Joining me today are Jason Roberson and Lauren Cooper. Jason is part of the Dassault System Aerospace and Defense Strategy and Innovation team, which works on some really cool stuff, including virtual twin experiences, which I suspect we're probably going to talk a lot about today. And then Lauren is part of the Dassault System Business Consulting team, where she specializes in aerospace and defense. Jason and Lauren, really glad to have both of you here with us today. I'd like to start by just hearing a little bit about you guys and a little bit about Dassault. So if you could, please just start by introducing yourselves, and then we'll take the discussion from there.
Okay, well, thanks, Matt. Appreciate it, and thanks, Space News, for having us today, and Lauren for joining the effort. So my background, I spent 25 years in the U.S. Air Force in the space program before it was Space Force, primarily working on space, but also command and control and integration of capabilities into military operations. And when I retired from the Air Force a few years ago, I consulted with startups that were submitting SBIR programs, so I got really quickly exposed to startups and the brilliant startups really that are bringing great innovation into space. I primarily worked with space startups, but there were some that were non-space. And then I joined Dassault and am doing, as you mentioned, working to bring virtual twin experiences more broadly into the space industry.
Great.
My name's Lauren Cooper. I started my career at NASA working in space operations and then moved over to Boeing, working in software development, simulation, hardware procurement, really everything along product life cycle, as well as working in their emerging programs. After that, I moved here to Dassault, where I am sitting at the convergence of business and technology, using my space knowledge and expertise along with the solutions that Dassault provides to consult for any size business. Lately, we have been working with a lot of startups in the aerospace and defense industry. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
Great, awesome. Well, thanks to both of you. Well, let's start by talking about the current state of the space economy in general. Space is taking off, quite literally, with today's Starship launch. So with that in mind, with the growth of space that's taking place, how are technology and increased accessibility to space really driving that growth? What are you guys seeing in terms of the space economy in general?
Yeah,
Yes.
space economy. Oh, Jason, did you want to take this one?
No, you go ahead, please. You first.
Okay, we're seeing some specific trends that are really shaping the economy right now. If you think back to the 60s and 70s of the original space era, we saw a focus on some specific initiatives, and space was really a priority. And we feel like we've seen that life cycle come back into play, and space is a priority now with some legacy initiatives still in focus in a different way, specifically launch vehicles. We are building larger launch vehicles with greater access deeper into space, while also developing smaller vehicles to make low Earth orbit more cost effective and more accessible. At the same time, we're seeing those lunar initiatives come back, but in a more commercialized way. It's no longer democratized nations, chomping at the bit to get to the surface of the moon. It's now smaller entities getting there, whether it be orbit, low Earth orbit, or deep into space. So all the while, we have new space markets, whether it be small satellites and constellations, or even global trends really driving initiatives in space, like Earth imaging is a huge one. Manufacturing, space for Earth manufacturing, space for space manufacturing. We're seeing all of these trends really shape not only the space industry, but global industries as a whole. Yeah, we've got this slide here that kind of touches on that. I broke it down into 5 main functionalities. So at the top here, we have space data and analytics. One thing that I mentioned is Earth observation. So before you can think of major players that would be interested in Earth observation and imaging, but now we're seeing additional industries using AI enabled imagery to find patterns, whether it be marine and offshore with shipping patterns and times and schedules, or oil and gas looking at remote pipeline, whether they need to do predictive maintenance on it. All of this is driving space innovation from the ground. We also see manufacturing, whether that be in space, space for Earth, and additive manufacturing. You know, building components, building parts, but also building things for additional industries like fiber optic cables or 3D tissue printing, things that are enabled in microgravity environments to be more efficiently done. I also have innovative technologies listed here, which is the most generic terminology, but it does cover a lot of developments that we're seeing in the space industry, whether that be advancements in current technologies, thinking of robotics, improved robotics, or technologies on the ground. For example, something that Dassault offers is digital technologies to companies. And what we see is if you look at the data, venture capital investment breakdowns for startups, you see over 50 cents on the dollar go to downstream technologies and companies. And so we're seeing that really driving startup and small businesses and where they're making their investments. And then the last 2 things are sustainability and security. Sustainability is a huge factor. And when we think about it, everybody thinks of sustainability a different way, whether it be green ecosystems or financial sustainability or preservation. All of those play a role in the space industry. And lastly is security, just like those legacy initiatives, more now than ever, we're seeing a need for cybersecurity, protection of our assets, military level, and in a commercial sense. And Jason, I know, can speak to that from his experience in the Space Force. So,
Yeah.
Jason, do you have anything to add?
I do. I wanted to, I think we got excited and skipped our intro video. So in
Oh, I'm
addition to
so
what Laura just said,
sorry.
yeah, I did the same thing. And really it pairs nicely with what you just teed up. So Matt, do you have that ready? It's just a
Yeah,
1 minute,
let's
so
let's watch
bear
that.
with
I think
us.
that'll be good. Some good background here.
Nearly 65 years ago, satellites were invented and captured the world's imagination and wonder. Today, the fascination has only deepened. It's a new frontier of satellite technology where companies can now collectively extend the limit of rocketry and satellite innovation, making space more accessible. The race is on to launch satellites into space more optimally and sustainably. By bridging the real and virtual universes, you accelerate innovation, from rocketry and satellite design to manufacturing and operations, so you can deploy first-time right satellites into orbit. Go further and faster. Unlock new opportunities with the 3D Experience platform.
So I'll add to that in addition to what Lauren said. 100 years ago in the 1920s and 30s was the golden age of flights, where we saw all this innovation, great things happening with air and with aviation. So I think we're entering, or we're already in, the golden age of commercial space today, about 100 years behind where aviation was. And those trends that Lauren just mentioned are, I'm sure many of the people joining us today are working in those areas, and they've found their niche in this space access that's happening. And what's driven the growth that we started talking about was, a reduction in the cost of launch. I think we have a chart a little bit later, but really, if you look at the last 10 years, we're not even going to go all the way back to the shuttle days, but just in the last 10 years, to get a kilogram to orbit, it's gone down 7 to 10 times. The cost is reduced that much, depending on the platforms that you compare. You mentioned Starship today. Wow, this mega reusable rocket that's coming into the market. We're gonna, they do Falcon 9s all the time, but there's new systems coming online that are reusable as well from Blue Origin, Relativity Space, Rocket Lab as well, and but those are ride shares that are bringing down that cost, and even the bespoke launches, say small launch. Like Able Space, ABL Space, Orbex in the UK, and others are much cheaper than they used to be. So the barriers to enter space have come down and it's become more affordable. But then there's also a bottleneck to get there. So there's a demand for launch and reusable launch for sure.
That's great. These trends so interesting. How do you see them affecting, smaller companies in particular, right? Obviously it affects the whole space economy, but these small, medium-sized businesses and startups, how do these trends kind of shape what those folks are doing?
So the opportunities for these small medium businesses is evolving. For over 60 years, it was really, or when we started 60 years ago, it was really Earth observation and then communication. Kind of put weather in that area too. So there's new opportunities even in those traditional missions. So for Earth observation, there are now companies developing not just low Earth orbit, but very low Earth orbit. So it's a whole new game there with the new technology available to fly at very low Earth orbit and get higher resolution imagery, multiple packages on board one satellite. There's even development of communication constellations in very low Earth orbit underway to speed the transmission of data. In addition to high throughput satellites, so those traditional areas are growing a lot. Um, we were absent from the moon. We being the U.S. because we're focused in the U.S. even though we've got a global audience. So the U.S. was absent from the lunar surface for 50 years, and who brought us back to the lunar surface most recently? It wasn't a mega company. It wasn't the government. It was a small business. It was Intuitive Machines. It was a small business that did that. And then on board that lander, one company that have known as Lone Star Data Holdings was on board that lander, essentially bringing data centers into space. So that's a whole market. Data centers, terrestrial data centers is big business. Well, those are going to extend into space as well. And even space computing constellations, like a company like Nebula Compute is developing. And then when we think about air traffic, that's a pretty complex puzzle to map. Well, space traffic is going to be space traffic control is an opportunity as well. I think a little bit later we'll talk a bit about ISAM. That can be a whole webinar in itself, in space service assembly and manufacturing, and then which has the implied tasks of space situational awareness, which were traditionally government, but now you've got like Leo Labs satellite network and Slingshot's optical network, and then North Star Earth and Space, putting satellites in space to look at other satellites. So there's loads of innovation and opportunities for small businesses in space, and we haven't even touched the data aspect, all this data being generated and processing the data. So there are also innovators bringing up how to manage the data, and they get the attention of the OEMs. So the OEMs, it's harder to move a big organization. So they notice these shakers in the space industry, and then can invest with them, can partner with them, and then work them into their strategy as well. And I think opportunities for these startups too, when they have this great idea, well, how do you get started? Approaching in the U.S. and in other countries too, they have the SBIR program where you can get that investment in. The government will give you money to advance your technology, and if you pass that sanity check, then you can get non-dilutive funding, and you can also get the attention of OEMs and bring your products to market, advance your technology readiness levels. So I think the opportunities, I'd like to say they're only limited by one's imagination, but there's a big technology piece that has to come into play too. We're not quite to Star Trek yet, but we're advancing rapidly.
Yeah. To what extent, are SMBs able to shape the future, right? Right now, they're reacting to all these trends that you guys outlined. In terms of what comes next, in terms of in space exploration and advancement, how can SMBs shape the agenda? What role do they have in driving this, not just participating?
Yeah, that's a great comment. How can I impact this mega economy that's been shaped by essentially it took the treasure of a nation, a government, to be able to go into these areas historically. Well, that was 60 years ago, and the game has changed really. It doesn't require billions to get there now. There are companies that are shaping the things we can do in space. So we've gone into space with this throwaway mentality where you launch a rocket, it's gone. When your satellite's gone, you hopefully park it somewhere where it's out of the way or you deorbit it, but that's not always the case. We're seeing regulations come into play for that specific area, and there was recently a fine to a major company that a small business might not be able to survive financially, but a billion-dollar company can. But we're seeing kind of norms of behavior come into the commercial sector too, and some enforcement mechanisms. But changing that mentality of a throwaway system, and okay, we need to build satellites that can be serviced, can be refueled, can have bolt-ons to increase their capabilities and extend their life. And one company that I've met, they're always a pleasure to interact with, is Orbit Fab. You might have heard of them. They're gas stations in space, and they're partnering with great people like Impulse Space and others to bring gas stations to space and refuel satellites. Well, your satellite, a new generation of satellite has to be built to do that, because not you go up to an old, choose a satellite, Milstar satellite, you can't refuel it. It's huge, and it doesn't have that capability. But innovation isn't just limited to this startups, because startups can move quicker because they're smaller. But OEMs like Northrop Grumman has the mission extension vehicle where they can extend unprepared spacecraft. They can extend the lives of unprepared spacecraft. So we're seeing innovation in a lot of areas. There's also a company called Starfish Space that's developing space tugs. And what can you do with that? Well, you're limited by your imagination. So ideally, it's to reposition, but there's many other use cases. And it's not just the physical satellites too. We mentioned nebula compute and in-space computing, but there's also people addressing how we do space architecture, like Solstar Space. So, let's put other kit on the satellites and utilize the existing networks or new networks to be able to, we don't always have to transmit all the data to Earth, process it and transmit it back up. We've got better highways that we could be using.
Yeah.
And we have to keep in mind too, when if a startup has a great idea and thinks it's just too big of a market. Well, SpaceX was once a startup, and then look at what they did today. It was just, I'm sure there's people geeking out about it, but it was pretty cool to watch that happen, and fast forward a few years, and that it'll be much more active. But I also think an advantage that small businesses or startups have to keep in mind too is they're also not operating the way the OEMs did. OEMs were, old file-based systems and even paper charts that have eventually, they're going through digitalization, but the startups are born digital. So they're born digital. They're born with models, and they can have a model-based approach, and collaboration tools that will enable them to move faster and be more efficient. So I think and eliminate silos is a big challenge that they could overcome easily. So I think there's loads of opportunities for startups, and to I didn't really address the exploration aspect, but there's some, like the intuitive machines example that we said a minute ago, and there's definitely a lot of people addressing the exploration areas as well.
Yeah, it's exciting. Lauren, do you have anything to add about the opportunities that are out there?
Yes, so there are a few slides. I got a little out of order with the questions, but if we want to go back to the previous slide, there's some information about where investments are going that I think is relevant to the opportunities conversation. So this is basically reading from the chart, but estimates suggest that the space economy may grow to $1 trillion over 2040, so within the next 15 years. And to the right here, we see where those investments are expected to be funneled. So some of those trends that we mentioned, I know a lot of smaller players already in that: national security, satellite communications, edge computing, and Earth observation. So if we go to the next slide, the reason that's relevant is because what we're seeing is it's no longer a large player game here in terms of actually getting to space. There are high barriers to entry, even if it's just development costs and capital needs, but we always have heard the ticket to space is what's so expensive and actually getting on a ride. So this is going over that cost per kilogram payload for heavy and medium payload sizes. And we see that this plot is logarithmic. So this is an exponential decrease over time of the cost to get to space. And the importance of this is that it's no longer just larger players that can afford those tickets. It's now a smaller company with lower funding or a research opportunity for a college student. They can now get on those launch vehicles. And one thing to note is not only have the prices decreased substantially, but the launch incidents, I'm sure everyone is aware, but we've seen over a 600% increase over the last 5 years in launch numbers alone. So the access is there, the costing is down, and that opens up the door to actually getting to space, which is one of the major barriers that we've seen in the past.
That's great. So you guys have outlined all these amazing opportunities for small and medium-sized businesses and startups, but space isn't easy. We all know that. So what are some of the challenges, for folks who want to seize these opportunities and really exploit them? What are some of the headwinds that they're going to be facing, and how do you think they should start to approach those?
Yeah, so within the context of startups and small businesses, finances is a huge concern, right? There's high barriers to entry and access to funding challenges. And then on top of that, the capital costs of development are substantial. And that's true for any program, whether it be a smaller company or a larger, well-established aerospace company. And historically, we've seen multiple attempts to drive down development costs with only marginal improvements. So finance is a huge concern. Speaking of those larger companies, the market domination of those larger companies, especially within innovation, is a huge factor for smaller companies. All of these companies that see these opportunities are trying to capitalize on them, whether it be within their own divisions or through acquisitions. But smaller companies not only need to rapidly innovate against these new technologies, but also establish differentiators to sell against these major market dominators. Along with that market comes the uncertainty, right? Market volatility and uncertainty of demand. A third thing is talent. So we're in a new generation of workers. That's the loyalty that we have seen from baby boomers it's a different mentality with myself and my generation. We're expected to take more jobs and move around, and we are more project-based rather than devoting an entire lifespan to one organization. And so because of that, smaller businesses are having to pivot. And one of those things is with aerospace companies, you need deep expertise within not only a subject matter, but also your specific domains within your company and your processes. And so finding a way to maintain that while having turnover is a really important thing that we see for startups. Additionally, just having to compete with some of the offerings that startups do in terms of compensation, work-life balance, remote and hybrid opportunities. So attracting that talent, maintaining and retaining that talent, and then, of course, also retaining that experience when that talent decides to potentially leave. And the last thing Jason kind of mentioned is regulation. So space is so highly regulated, and we're only seeing more developments as more players are getting into space in any form. But there are specific regulations we already see that we see smaller companies struggle with. For example, quality management. Just a simple AS audit, simple, it's maybe not the best word, but if you are just building out your processes, building them out with a mindset of complying with these regulations is incredibly important. And if you struggle to do that, that will be more costly, which plays into those additional challenges of finances, schedule, and competition.
Yeah, great. Jason, anything to add about the challenges of taking advantage of all these opportunities?
No, I think Lauren nailed it, and capping it
Yeah.
off with, yeah, space is hard.
Great. I know one of the challenges that I think is huge, and you alluded to this when you were talking about the trends out there, is sustainability, right? That's such a huge priority across all industries, including space. So how do you think startups and SMBs can kind of address the environmental impact of space and really prioritize that among all these other things they have to worry about?
Yeah, that's a great question, a great challenge, because it's been a throwaway mentality really going forward, or as we've been going forward for 60 years. So, when you have a model based and a digital approach terrestrially, you can use those models and simulate your product. You can simulate your manufacturing process. You can even simulate a virtual twin of your supply chains and address, whatever issue you need to. But it'll help you to see things you wouldn't see in a file-based system and be able to see where I've got non-value added time over here. I've got non-value added processes here. I've got non-value added inventory. And I need to build in, or on a supply chain question, how do I get some redundancy in my supply chain? So you could identify areas in the terrestrial process of where you can reduce waste in the development and manufacturing and get a greener product. And even going back to the generative design that Lauren mentioned, almost AI generating, you could be building a part for your satellite, and this generative design can show you that you don't need to have a solid metal part. You'll get the same strengths based on your physics-based simulations of your model, with a honeycomb pattern, or fill in the blank. But you can get a lighter object, so you've put less into the product and less into the industrial process. So there's benefits terrestrially to a model-based approach in a digital environment. And then in space, we talked about ISAM, getting away from those throwaway systems and having serviceable, refuelable satellites to create a sustainable in-space economy. Extend the life of your system and extend the revenue generated from that system. It would seem to make sense. And there's some implied tasks there. So the debris that's in space, whether it's natural debris or a lot of human generated debris, we've got to, before we can get to this in-space economy with shop floors on space stations and laboratories, we're going to have to kind of clean up the roads a bit, these main highways that we're going to be using. So you've got to do the space surveillance, look at it, and then do active debris removal to clean up that space environment. And another, startup that's doing that or addressing that specifically is Space Cowboy, is what they're called. Former military space officer as well, leading that effort. And just talk to them, the innovation, and seeing the need for it, and to address sustainability in space. And then how we go into space too. Once we get into space, do we need to carry everything? Well, there's other companies addressing, how do we harvest things in space or grow plants in space. Interstellar Labs is specifically addressing that area in the startup areas. But yeah, I think sustainability, you don't have to be sustainable and then to give up your profit with sustainability. I think there's a pairing of sustainability and profitability, but we're just not there yet. I don't think it's been realized yet until we apply these model-based approach in a digital environment to see that, hey, look, we can clean up space and make a profit. We can have better processes terrestrially, and we can be greener, if you want to use that term, greener and profitable in the space economy as well.
Yeah. I think another huge challenge is speed, right? Doing all this, but being the first to do it, being first to market. How can SMBs take advantage of all these opportunities and overcome all these challenges that you guys have outlined, but do it quickly and do it first.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that model-based digital approach. So if you have a uh, virtual twin of your product, you've got your digital model, and you can put it into a virtual physics-based environment to see how it behaves, what works, what doesn't work, how you can stress it, how it performs as it was supposed to, and you can trace through your model-based system those requirements of the product to see that you've met them all, and then to see what the performance looks like. You don't have to build a physical model of that and then throw it off of a tower to see how it works. You can have a right first time product before you get to that manufacturing aspect, and that will speed the processes and save some of your time and money really. But I think having a model based approach fed by a physics based simulation in a collaborative environment, that just being in that area eliminates silos and allows you to collaborate with your team, with your stakeholders, and with others. So I think that'll enables people to move much faster. And Lauren, please, if you have any comments to add to that as well, for speed to market.
No, it's a great point. And the connectivity of a unified model structure, unified product structure that you have in a single environment allows you to minimize the amount of time committed to all of those different activities, because they are in a streamlined process that you can manage from every level of the organization, from program management, project management, and actual implementation. So Jason made a great point there.
Great. So you guys made it really clear technology is such a key enabler of all of this stuff. You've peppered the conversation with all kinds of great references to solutions, but let's be a little more explicit here. What are some of the new and emerging technologies that you're really excited about that SMBs can take advantage of to really get that competitive edge?
Yeah, so speaking from a Dassault Systems perspective, Dassault has such a large portfolio that I don't think we would have enough time to fully go through everything. But there is one thing that we've talked about that I think answers a lot of the points that we've made throughout the webinar, and that is generative design that Jason mentioned. I'd like to highlight that a little bit. So we talked about the issue of talent retention and expertise retention, as well as finances. And for a startup or a small business, it's really important to pay attention to each one of those things, right? And generative design can help you do that. So there's a functionality within our CATIA program. It's a functional generative design assistant. I may have gotten that name a little wrong, but essentially you can give it a black box and tell it requirements of what you need, and it will provide you a part based on those requirements. You can also provide it a part, a 3D model within major assembly with functional interfaces and requirements set. And what you find is, if you can think about a part traditionally created by any type of CAD user, it's going to be solid, right? It'll have holes where needed, and it will connect or serve its basic function. But what you see with the generative designers, just like Jason mentioned, you find something much more organic and optimized. And for the generative design, one thing that you can specify is what type of manufacturing will actually be executed, whether it's molding, forging, milling. And so all of those things, 3D printing, all of those things are taken into account to where you have optimized weight, optimized for structural loading, optimized for manufacturing, minimizing parts. And all of this can be done by a basic user, meaning that you don't have to have 30 years of expertise in design to know how to utilize that. So, and to do that well. So ultimately, it drives down costs. It doesn't require the expertise or the compensation needed that other companies maybe would, and it gets that part onto the next point in the product lifecycle sooner. So it's technology. Oh my gosh, excuse me. It's technologies like that that are really enabling innovation here on the ground that will get you to space sooner.
That's so cool. I love that. It strikes me as one of the real advantages of technology is collaboration and partnership, right? We talked earlier a little bit earlier about competitive advantage, but it's interesting. You can't do this stuff alone. How important is collaboration and partnership in achieving all this and using technology to do that?
Yeah, I think you said it right. No one's going at this alone. You know, you have your idea, you have people that have similar ideas, and you collaborate to design what you're doing, whether it's designing a product or a process. Um, but you can collaborate across engineering and systems, but then the collaboration has to go out to your suppliers as well. And even before you get to a product, you're going to have investors. So collaboration with investors, stakeholders. Stakeholders may not be investors, but they might be stakeholders in what you're doing. And then ultimately, when you get to market, you need to collaborate with your customers to maintain to maintain the position you want, to establish and maintain the position you want in the market. And I think a collaborative environment, a digital environment, leveraging virtual twins will eliminate these silos where instead of your different engineering departments throwing their here's my electrical design thrown over the wall and here's my structural design thrown over the wall and someone's there catching these and saying, okay, now how do I put these together? Well, in a model-based system, there is no wall, so you can all put them together in real time on a model and instead of managing file versions across silos and you can am I working on version 21.2 or am I on version 20? That's eliminated in a collaborative environment. You're all working on the single source of truth data. uh, and I think that collaboration fuels innovation to improve processes and products. So, collaboration comes in many forms. Next week is the satellite show in DC, and Laura and I will both be there. And every time I go to one of these major space events and you talk to a startup, you're collaborating, and then you're going to talk to them and learn about their product, and you're going to learn more, and you're going to get ideas. So I think the collaboration in all forms is great, but especially collaborating to design and build your product is critical to get that forward in a model-based system. And I think we did have some a question in the lineup there about what are these tools for model-based approach, and we're going to be addressing that and giving you more information as we move along today.
Yeah, great. Um, I think the model-based approaches and generative design, all these cool technologies, they enable so many really exciting things. I think one of the most exciting things that they enable that you've kind of talked about, Jason, is ISAM. And for those who don't know that acronym, it's In-Space Servicing, Assembly, and Manufacturing. I'd love to just take a moment to dwell on that a little bit further because I just think it's so interesting. How important is ISAM in this new space economy that we've been talking about?
Well, I do think it's very important, and I'm excited about ISAM as well because it's just a whole change in how we go into space and how we stay in space and continue and build a space economy, really. So, as you mentioned, in space service, assembly, and manufacturing. But there's some applied tasks in front of that we mentioned before. You got to have your space situational awareness, see what's there, or some space domain awareness, it's even called. What's there? And traditionally, that was provided by kind of government offices tracking this and others contributing to space catalog. But now you have commercial companies doing space situational awareness, and then commercial companies that are going to address active debris removal, whether it's Starfish's tug that goes and removes debris, or Space Cowboy's system that removes debris, or others from around the world that help clean up and then move into servicing and relocating satellites and extending the life of these satellites, bolt on and repair in space. But eventually, NASA's awarded contracts to have commercial space stations as the ISS goes into the sunset. Axiom Space is one of those, Voyager, and then there's smaller companies like Above Space and Vast that are going to build these, and Think Orbital is another that they're going to put these factories in space, if you want to call it that, or space stations. But these space stations will provide shop floors in space and laboratories in space where we can, some of the main products that are focused on right now are semiconductors, pharmaceuticals is a big area, so life sciences is a big area that relates to space that many people might not think of beyond, astronaut flight. But fiber optic development and even organ tissue growth in space. So there's a lot of opportunity for ISAM beyond just, obviously we've got to refuel satellites and service satellites, but the economy that can create and the factories that we can put into space and laboratories we can put into space. Ultimately, the goal of ISAM is really to benefit life on Earth and have a space for Earth economy set up. Space for space is happening, but space for Earth is where the real return on investment comes into play.
I love that, space for Earth. That's great. I'd love to, this is all great. It's all wonderful. It's all exciting, but we need tools to do this, right? We need software that can help us accomplish these things. So I'd love to talk about 3D Experience, which is one of those tools. We've got a video I'd like to to show to just kind of cue this conversation up, and then we'll talk a little bit about that.
Throughout evolution, instinctively, we have used tools, drawing, diagrams, models, and experiments to understand, to learn, to solve, to express, and to overcome. 3D modeling and computer simulation have revolutionized traditional drafting and trial and error testing, enabling us to tackle ever more complex challenges. This virtual world has remained largely isolated from the physical world. The virtual twin experience, this new concept, a virtual copy of a physical item, finally bridges the gap between the virtual and the real world in totality. Designers, engineers, and businesses tap into this potential to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the product development process. At Dassault Systèmes, we have taken this concept even further. The virtual twin experience, supported by the 3D Experience platform, is the world-leading solution, allowing ever closer alignment between the virtual and the real worlds. A virtual twin experience is made up of a set of virtual models that span a system in its entirety. Crucially, these models are all hosted on a single platform, allowing a range of stakeholders to interact throughout the life cycle of the system. Everyone is connected, accessing a single source of data through the lens of their own role. This is the exemplar of leveraging the virtual world to improve real-world operations. Dassault Systèmes has a 40-year legacy of innovation in the aerospace industry, which continues today as we deploy the virtual twin experience in the design, production, and operation of aircraft for the world's leading manufacturers. Whether the focus is advanced simulation of airframe structures for certification or solving the complex puzzles of air traffic control, the virtual twin experience provides the ability to rapidly explore potential scenarios, predict future behavior, and create precise solutions. Manufacturing is revolutionized by digital twin technology. Factory setups can cost millions of euros. The most expensive time to fix design errors is after built-out systems physically exist. Digital twin technology allows the client, in conjunction with the design team, to visualize an entire factory, simulate its processes, outputs, and effect on the surrounding environment before ground is broken. Thanks to the virtual twin experience and the opportunities it affords, sustainable business innovation is realized across the full product lifecycle, allowing new business models to be explored which reduce risk and improve productivity. Unite the virtual and the physical world. Imagine and realize the future. A world of new opportunity awaits with Dassault Systèmes Virtual Twin Experience.
Awesome. That was a great overview of the 3D experience. What else, would you guys add about that? What's important to know about a solution like this and how it can enable all of the innovation and collaboration that we've been talking about?
Well, I would say that it's a business and innovation platform. It provides a holistic, real-time vision of your business activity and your ecosystem. And we've talked throughout to the discussion today about silos being eliminated. So in this platform, it's a collaborative platform. You leverage digital continuity across the product life cycle. That's within your organization and with your external suppliers and stakeholders. So it's uh, an enabler for sure in accelerating where a business wants to go with their products and processes.
Great. Lauren, anything to add?
Yeah, I wanted to add, so I think we've been speaking to model-based practices at such a high level, but I noticed one of the anonymous attendees mentioned some of the things that model-based design can do. So just wanted to touch on that since it's in the Q&A, is that if you build a 3D model, what we see traditionally is people having to build all of the documents as well. And even something as simple as building a 3D document or 3D model and then having your 2D drawings as part of that, requirements built in, and then from that being able to build a larger structure that drives EBOM and MBOM connectivity throughout your processes is something that's enabled through our platform. So although we're using some of those buzzwords and high level concepts, realistically what we see is the connectivity throughout your entire product lifecycle from engineering to manufacturing. There are potentials for improvement at every level, from end user, project management, all the way to business management at an enterprise level.
That's great. Wonderful. Well, I know we're coming up on our time here. We've got some Q&A. Before we dive into that real quick, I'd love maybe some more case studies and examples of SMBs who are doing this stuff and being successful. I know, Jason, you've mentioned several already. Any more that you guys want to call out
Well, a
and let
couple
folks
that,
know?
yeah, there's a couple you could that the attendees or anyone can get more details on 3ds.com. The space section of aerospace and defense, or in the customer cases, is Interstellar Labs. They're really using the virtual twin experience to develop their biopods to then take the ability to grow plants and provide things, life in space. They took the virtual world, married it with the real, and now they're producing this through virtual twins experiences to sustain existence and other technology development applications. Another one is the exploration company that they're advancing space exploration in order to make it more affordable and accessible and sustainable, with vehicles to do cargo transport and eventually personnel into space. So there's more details on both of those companies online. But yeah, those are a couple of references. I'll say they're references, but the companies I've mentioned throughout are just the innovators, not necessarily saying that they're, our clients, but they're the innovators that I notice and that you all probably read in the news frequently as well as many others that are out there.
Great. Well, we've got some great questions that people have been asking throughout the discussion. So let's spend maybe a good 5-10 minutes here at the end getting through those. Let's see, where should we start? Let's start with just the, okay, here we go. All right, first up, what's the distinction between upstream and downstream that you mentioned earlier on in the presentation?
That's referring primarily to product life cycle, so downstream technologies being production, and for space you can think anywhere after design, so manufacturing all the way to launch integration.
Great. How are you seeing space-focused companies adopt and use virtual twin capabilities? And related to that, how do you see that as being affordable for small business?
Yeah, I think that the virtual twin capabilities are critical for space, because if you apply it to automotive or you apply it to aviation, you have the ability to physically touch your product and it comes back in for maintenance, repair, and overhaul servicing. It's terrestrially with us. So the virtual twin, it helps make those products, but in space your product is gone. So if you need to say, what does this look like, and what was the data here, and how does this product perform, well, your virtual twin gives you that information. So you have really from drawing board to operations a continuity, and you're able to look at the product virtually that you built and deployed. and even improve your models with how it's performing. You know, whenever we put things into space, it seems like we always squeeze more out of them, get more capability. Hey, that satellite was designed to last 5 years and it's on, you know, 50. You know, that's an exaggeration, but we get more out of it because it costs money to replace it and it's generating revenue or capability depending on what your business is. And then when we talk about, is this affordable for small businesses? Well, absolutely. Yeah. There's many examples in the customer stories, but if you um, go to our websites, there's 3D Experience for Startups. There's a whole library there about a resource library and success stories, and there's also a startup offer. Similarly, there's a startup offer for SolidWorks, which is a lot of the introductory, and then moving on to the 3D Experience environment um, is an opportunity. But there's startup offers in both SolidWorks and the 3D Experience, as well as our 3D Experience Lab is our accelerator that we have. So you can pitch and get brought into the lab and get free software and mentoring from across the globe. And whenever we have those pitches, they do come from many different countries. And then the last one I wanted to mention was well, I mentioned the 3D Experience for Startup and the resource library there. So I would say that it's very applicable. I think it's even more applicable for space because of the hands-off nature after it's launched, at least for now. And then that, yes, it is an affordable option in my
Yeah.
opinion.
And one thing to add there, virtual twins, what you saw was just a virtual twin of the product, but you can actually create a virtual twin of your assembly floor to optimize manufacturing processes. There's a lot of opportunities there moving your product through that manufacturing and assembly line. So the possibilities are not limited to what's shown in this video. And because Dassault does have such a large portfolio, the way virtual twins can help is really limitless.
Yeah. When you talk about cost, it strikes me too. These types of tools create efficiencies, right? You got to look at the ROI. It's not just the upfront cost of the solution, right? It's going to enable you to do more with less. I assume is that right?
That's the ultimate story that we find ourselves telling, is doing more with less. Realistically, the connectivity that this offers and what we see in comparison to traditional companies that are file-based is pretty substantial, and the financial cases that we're putting out reflect that. You should expect to see process improvements and productivity, optimization of processes in general, whether that be reusability, design improvements, or even minimization of waste and scrap in manufacturing processes. We see that across the board. And one thing to note in terms of costing is it's a really prudent conversation to have for startups and small businesses, because going from a file-based system or any of those legacy processes is really cost prohibitive. And we're seeing large companies do it because they need to compete. But ultimately, if you are building out your processes as a startup or trying to establish best practices, whatever that may be, to do that with a digital foundation, as Jason calls it, being born digital, is so cost effective and ultimately provides you built-in support for quality processes. Just across the board, we see that as the most cost-effective way to do it.
Right. We talked about 3D experience. One of our audience members wanted you to maybe expand on some more of the tools for executing a model-based approach that we've been talking about, right? What are some other tools that you might highlight for folks?
It's hard to choose. So Dassault Systems offers multiple brands across 12 different industries. And so I would almost, Jason, I don't want to defer this to you, but I would say if you are curious, either reach out to either of us and we can have a detailed conversation about the technical needs of your company. Or if you don't feel comfortable with that, just a quick Google search to 3ds.com. Will show you the offerings of the tooling that is offered, because it really does expand beyond your typical PLM into MES, MOM. Jason, do you have anything
Yeah,
to add?
yeah, I think you nailed it. And I would say that, people in our webinar today are probably focused on, satellite or rocketry. And so we have under 3ds.com, under Dassault Systems, aerospace and defense is where we would be focusing. But under aerospace and defense tab, you would find industry solution experiences, and underneath industry solution experiences, you'll find industry process experiences. So one of those that comes to mind is our industry process experience for satellite thermal management. And then if you look at that, then it says here's the suite that applies to these things. So if you're looking at thermal management, simulation, design, so it'll show you that here's some parts of CATIA, here's some parts of domain manufacturing, here's some parts of simulation for electromagnetics or simulation for vibroacoustics that you would potentially be that would be applicable to what you're doing. But it has a description of what's going on there, and there's literally hundreds of IPs out there where we have people that look at it and say, here's all the different applications in the software that are applicable to someone doing these things. If they're building an engine, whether they're focusing on propulsion or whether they're focusing on, fill in the blank. There's a lot there. I'll go ahead and let you know there's a lot there, but feel free to take a look, and then you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with our. If I can't answer your questions, I can probably find someone who can help guide.
Great, great. Someone's wondering, are these tools available to license commercially?
Absolutely,
Yes.
they're
Yes.
all 100% commercial availability.
Great.
And
Let's
then
look
one
at
of the things that I would like to highlight there, one of the things that we always stress is that we reinvest into R&D to improve the product. So we didn't just, build a product and here's what it does. So that generative design tool in CATIA that we've talked about, that's continuously improving because we invest in, okay, what's next? What's next? How do we bring the latest to the market? So if you look at a CATIA version from, the 80s to now, it's like looking at a automobile from 85 compared to its model now if it's still around. It's a completely different experience because of the reinvestment in improving the product.
Great. And that actually leads really well into our next audience question, which is, what do you expect from kind of the future of the space industry, right? What's kind of next on the horizon?
Yeah, that is a great question, and it really depends on your perspective. But I can see a lot more reusable rocketry. I can see space traffic management coming into play, as well as serviceable that you don't launch a system that isn't able to be serviced, that doesn't have a disposal end of life plan. I think we'll stop polluting space. I think we'll come up with there's even people developing greener ways to launch where the only output is water vapor. So I think we're going to continue to see both greener ways of getting to space and operating in space, and just more capable systems across the board. And I think we are going to see permanent human presence in space on commercial space stations, producing products to improve life on Earth. And then as we go out into cislunar space and into the lunar surface and beyond, it's if you look at if you look at today and then go back 20 years, what did space look like? You're going to say, wow, we've come a long way. And do that now, and I think you're really going to see a lot. It's just, I'm excited. I think it's going to be amazing.
It's a great
Great.
time to be in space, that's for sure.
Absolutely. I really do think we're in the golden age of space, similar to aviation 100 years ago.
Great, exciting. Well, we have lots more questions, more than we can get through. So I think unfortunately we're gonna have to wrap things up. I would just ask you guys for final remarks. As summing up our conversation today, what do you want to leave people with?
Yeah, I would say that, there's a huge amount of opportunity in space. It's hard, but there are organizations there to help you, whether they're advisors, free advisors, or companies that you use their products. So I think Dassault has solutions to enable your success, and there's find new ways of doing the old missions of space, and then continue to bring that innovation forward. And if you're at Satellite next week, I would be happy to talk with you.
Great.
Well said.
Wonderful. Well, thanks everyone. I so appreciate the time. It was a really great conversation, and I'm excited to see what comes next. So wish everyone a great day, great evening, wherever you are. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.